Do you need to improve your squat position, particularly once the weights get heavier? This video is about stance width for the back squat and what you might want to choose to have the best results possible. In coaching, or more appropriately kinesiology generally speaking, we tend to refer to biomechanics as a broad-ranging term, which covers the positions we hit and how we move through space. In reality, there are multiple subsections within this: biodynamics, biomechanics, the influence of morphology, the list goes on and on. All of these sit on a kind of pyramid or scale, ranging in their importance and relative influence on our movement. So, some changes or cues will have a small impact, while others will drastically change how we move. Today, we're talking about the very base of the pyramid, a factor which altered will change absolutely everything about the squat, and this, as I've mentioned above, is the width of your stance, or how far apart your feet are. I can change the tempo with which you move, and it will improve your movement. I can give you specific cues around bracing your midline, and it will make you look more solid in the squat. But if I want to alter your squat quickly, the first place we should look is how wide your feet are set. The width of your feet overshadows almost everything else. It determines what muscle groups are prioritized, where the weight will sit over your base of support, how deep you will eventually sit, and ultimately how much weight you can move on the bar. In the textbooks and training manuals of our fundamental strength conditioning texts, there are a broad range of recommendations about shoulder width or between hip and shoulder width. This, of course, all depends on whether you're aiming for a high bar or low bar style, your relative lever lengths, and of course how much mobility you've available to you in your hips and ankles. For today, we're going to focus on 3 stance widths and talk about why one will likely be better for you if, of course, you want the best squat possible. Okay, so let's take a look at these 3 stances. Firstly is the classic moderate stance. This tends to be just outside hip width and offers a good amount of posterior and anterior recruitment. This style of squat tends to be favoured by sporting athletes, hybrid athletes, and many weightlifters. It requires a pretty good level of hip and ankle mobility, is achievable for pretty much everyone regardless of height, size or experience, and can be used year on year, cycle on cycle in perpetuity. The second is something I jokingly refer to as the penguin squat. This stance sets the feet right underneath the hips. This is a pretty good looking squat, super aesthetic, and admittedly it's pretty damn athletic all around. You put the bar super high in your traps, sit down till your ass hits your heels, and you smile. But how does stance width enable this? Firstly, when our feet are narrower, the hips require less rotation as you sit into the bottom position. In most cases, this stance simply requires a large degree of ankle mobility and hip flexion. But there are some problems with it. Firstly, if you aren't blessed with mobile ankles, this narrow stance can get blocked. The ankles stop dorsiflecting, the knees then stop moving forward, and the hips are left to move through an arc, pushing further and further back until you pass parallel, where our hips then swing back in again onto our heels. This semicircular arc causes massive issues. Primarily, it causes our torso to lean forward. If you have longer legs, particularly longer femurs, this arc is magnified and the torso lean increased. And then finally is a wide stance. The big boy, feet outside shoulder width or just at shoulder width. We set our feet wider, giving our hips more room to sit down and reducing the need for forward knee travel and ankle mobility. This stance does allow for athletes with restricted ranges of motion to hit parallel with somewhat less hassle than the other 2 styles, but it does come at a cost. The first cost is hip recruitment. Now, this increased hip recruitment isn't necessarily an issue, as many people need stronger glutes and posteriors, but it can cause problems when the athlete does not have a good amount of hip external rotation available to them. You can see this commonly when a wider stance squatter sits into the bottom position and their knees begin to track inside the line of their toes. You need to keep those toes tracking over your middle toe. Trust me, your knees will thank you for it. The second cost of this style of squat is reduction in quad development. Some people squat just to get heavier squats, while many of us are using the squat to become stronger. If you're using the squat to become stronger and get stronger legs, but your stance width is super wide, your knees will never go forward and in advance of your toes, and I'm afraid those chicken legs probably aren't going to get much juicier. Likewise, if you're using a wide stance squat to become as strong as possible in the specific movement of the squat, it can cause issues where you're now not using two massive muscle groups which could help you to move more weight. So now that we know each of the styles we're talking about, let's move on. The reason I think stance width should be one of the main focuses when optimizing the squat technique is that it's a rigid and immovable factor. Once your feet are set in a position, you cannot alter them. You can't brace your way through incorrect foot placement. You can't gain more muscle or accessory work your way through incorrect foot width. Once it's set, it's set. Also, as a coach or a self-coached athlete, you can easily change it. It's not like trying to get someone to think about keeping their knees forward as they push out at a bottom position, where the weights are already in motion and you're already under pressure, or getting someone to learn the correct tempo or bouncing out of the bottom position where the tendons must adapt and learn to take the load and store the potential energy. No, the stance width is simple to change. You walk out the weight, check your feet and change them if needed. When we talk about squats, we're always looking at them through two different lenses. The first is looking at it as a specific aim, a goal we want to achieve and master in its own right. And the second is through the point of view of a training tool, a tool to make our legs, backs, hips, and some combination of all three stronger. So from the mastery point of view, we want to move the most weight possible with the best technique as consistently as possible. In this case, we must put a few constraints, a guide rail around our own goals. This might be personally enforced, or it might be a rule set from your particular federation. Do you want a full ass to grass high bar Olympic style, or do you want a low bar squat, hip crease just below the knee, controlled, smooth and slow movement? This is up to you. Whatever you want to do, stance width is vital to it. If you're in the squatting for squatting's sake group, then you should look at stance width as an optimization exercise. Find what stance suits your strength, weakness, lever lengths and aims. Experiment with the stances, see what fits, take each one for a test drive, and don't be afraid to take a few weeks to actually feel your way through them and then decide. It's your squat at the end of the day, and all of your training should be there to serve yourself and no one else. If you want a super deep and narrow stance squat and you're happy to maybe limit the top end potential of your 1RM, then that is absolutely fine. No one else is going to do the work for you, and so don't let anyone else's opinion define whether you're happy with your squat or not. All I'm saying is, be aware that your choices in terms of starting positions will have an impact on the end goal. This of course holds true for the wider stance and usually shallower versions too. Most of us are not blessed with the insane talents of Max and Shatar, who can nail deep squats with a super wide stance. All I'm going to say is, usually, most of us mere mortals tend to squat to just about parallel with that wider stance, and that's absolutely okay. In terms of using the squat as a training tool, whether that's for the sole purpose of hypertrophy, strength, general movement mastery, or athletic development, our squatting style will change drastically. We might want to grow bigger quads, in which case a super narrow stance, very deep with the slow eccentric, will be the best tool for the job. Maybe you want to be pushing more glute and posterior strength, in which case a wider stance and more forward torso inclination will likely do well by you. Or maybe you're looking to become a more powerful grappler. In all of these cases, there is a best case scenario for your squat, and you've guessed it, stance width is a primary factor in each. In any case, I hope this video has been helpful for you. I hope you can now look at your squat and start to see where you can make little tweaks and how these tweaks start to make waves in your training and eventual results. If you'd like more in-depth discussions like this, sign up for the Sika Strength newsletter. We now have thousands of you reading the articles every week, which makes me really happy. I know we have a strong community, and it's great to see so many of you wanting to learn more and discuss training with greater detail and insight.